I can still feel the phantom grip on my ankles even now, just a week after it happened. Before we made the move to Texas, we lived in this house in Georgia with a backyard that was basically a kid's private kingdom. 2 acres of open grass, thick woods on 3 sides. It was the ultimate spot for sports or a massive game of manhunt. It had everything: a trampoline, a hot tub, a detached garage, and an above-ground pool. For a middle-class neighborhood, we had it made. Last Friday night, my friends Mike and Michael came over for a sleepover. I'm a Boy Scout, so I spent the afternoon setting up 2 tents, while the guys mostly goofed off. After some soccer and a quick baseball game, we inhaled some pizza my parents ordered around 7 p.m. Since the sun was setting, we headed into the living room to chill for a bit. We ended up binge watching Stranger Things. Watching 11 deal with the Upside Down and those bad men definitely had us on edge. By the time we stepped back outside into the dark, every shadow in the Georgia woods looked like a demogorgon. We started a game of manhunt to shake off the nerves. Mike and I were hiding first, while Michael was the hunter. I crawled under the trampoline in the far corner, near the edge of the woods. My plan was to wait for the hunter's whistle, then sneak toward the hot tub near the house so I could make a beeline for the back door. I was mid-sprint toward the hot tub when I heard a heavy thud. One of the trash bins on the side of the house nearly toppled over. Suddenly, the motion sensor light clicked on, bathing the side yard in that harsh, artificial glow. I peeked around the corner and saw him. A tall man in dark clothes, speed walking away from the light toward the woods. It definitely wasn't my dad. I called the game off instantly. My dad came out with a flashlight, but after checking the woods and the street, he found nothing.
Everyone inside tonight.
He said. We were bummed, but we went to my room and played PlayStation to distract ourselves. By midnight, we talked ourselves into being brave again. We figured the guy was long gone and we didn't want the tents I'd worked so hard on to go to waste. We snuck back out quietly. We weren't necessarily hiding it, but we didn't want to wake my dad up and start a whole thing. Mike and I zipped ourselves into one tent, and Michael took the second one. I was still awake listening to the crickets when I heard it, the distinct, rhythmic crunch of footsteps in the grass coming closer. Then, the sound of the tent zipper sliding up. The flap opened, and a face peered in. In the dark, I honestly thought my dad had caught us. They wanted to sleep out here, so we came back out, I muttered, half asleep. Then my vision cleared. The porch light was just bright enough to show that this wasn't my dad's face. It was a complete stranger, probably in his 40s, with deep-set eyes and a hollow, terrifying expression. When he realized I was looking right at him, his lips curled into a thin, tight line. He didn't say a word. He just lunged forward. I let out a scream of bloody murder that felt like it ripped my throat open. It wasn't just a shout. It was that raw, primal sound of pure survival. Mike jolted awake and seeing the silhouette over us, started shrieking too. The man didn't back off. Instead, he dove toward the bottom of our sleeping bag. His hands, cold and rough, clamped down hard around our ankles. He yanked us toward the opening of the tent, hissing, "Quiet, be quiet," through gritted teeth. The sensation of being dragged out into the dark by a predator was the most helpless I've ever felt. I kicked frantically, my heel catching him in the chest, while Mike was flailing and screaming like a siren. The noise was deafening in the small tent. The man looked back toward the house, realized he had zero chance of staying hidden now that the whole neighborhood was awake, and suddenly let go. He backed out of the tent and vanished into the trees like a ghost. We didn't stop running until we hit the back door, our socks sliding wildly on the kitchen tile as we slammed and locked the deadbolt. My dad was already there, charging out in his boxers with a heavy maglite in one hand and a baseball bat in the other, alerted by the noise. He spent the next half hour screaming into the dark woods, his voice echoing off the trees as he taunted the guy to come back and face him, while my mom stayed in the living room with us, her hands shaking as she dialed 911. The police arrived about 10 minutes later, their blue and red lights casting long, eerie shadows across the yard, just like the scenes we had watched in Stranger Things only hours before. They took our statements, but the real chill didn't hit until the next morning. My dad and one of the officers went back out to the tent to inspect the area. Nestled in the grass right behind our tent, where the man had likely been crouching and waiting for us to fall asleep, they found a small, rusted folding knife and a heavy roll of duct tape that didn't belong to us. The police kept the items as evidence, but they never made an arrest. Even though it's been only a week, I still can't go near those woods without looking for a tall figure in the shadows. I can't help but wonder how long he was standing there in the dark, watching the glow of the TV through the window, while we laughed at a fictional show, completely unaware that a real monster was waiting for the lights to go out.
It all happened when I was babysitting for this family in my town. Their daughters were 6 and 10. I was 16 back then. I ordered the pizza, and we all ate that, and then went on to play video games for the next hour or so, until Mabel, the young daughter, wanted to sleep. Mabel slept, and Violet, who was the older one, discussed the idea of watching Nightmare on Elm Street. Now, I don't know if her parents would have allowed that. I even wondered why they even hired a babysitter, since Violet was pretty responsible herself. But the matter of fact, I agreed to watch the Nightmare at Elm Street. Did not want to look like an uptight dude. So we started watching it, and I brought in popcorn. She was pretty terrified, and we were sharing the blanket on our feet, quietly enjoying the movie. At around midway in the movie, we started hearing rustling noises on the outside. At first I thought maybe their parents were home, so I told her to switch to The Princess Bride so I don't get scolded for showing a horror flick. As I got, there was nothing. I got back inside and she was on the phone. It was her parents. They said they'd be late. The roads have been blocked and there is a rumor that the power will go shortly. They ordered me to go back and instructed the daughter to shut the doors and sleep. She told me that I just couldn't shake the feeling of leaving both of them alone, so I stayed with them just to make sure. We stood there talking about things. She was smarter than her age, and she asked me all the questions about school and stuff, and we ended up doing her homework. And the power just went off cold, but we were ready. I told her to go to her sister, and she did. I stood down and locked all the doors and windows. It felt like a storm would build up. I went up and informed her about everything. 3 of us gathered around the TV, so it could be easier in case we had to make a run for things or cover. We got together to talk about things while Mabel slept. It was like one of those slumber parties that we had as a kid, and we chatted a lot, until the room started shaking. It felt like it was an earthquake. I quickly made Rabel and Violet go take a cover, and did it myself. I rolled on the flashlight to them, and told them to make way for the door outside. Before all the shaking, they made their way to the door, and we stepped outside. It was just the 3 of us, and a couple more people, since everybody was already out of town due to vacations. And as we stepped outside, we turned on the flashlights. Violet was holding me tightly, and I was carrying Mabel as she closed her eyes. Violet closed her eyes all the time too. And in a few minutes, a stream of lights made the night sky bright, and as it happened, I told Violet to open her eyes. It was beautiful. It seemed like a big, flat, square disc making its way to the sky. It was flying way closer than most flying vehicles, as an airplane or gliders or helicopters did. I and Violet and Mabel kept looking at it, mesmerized. The sky was all red, and soon, as we were in awe, we were terrified. As it rained fire from the rear of that unidentified object, almost as if it was crashing, I held the girls with all my grip strength, and we ran towards the house and took cover. We huddled together beneath the table, wrapping ourselves with Mabel's blanket. After an hour later, we went outside. The smoke from that flying object withered the whole city invisible, and the redness of its light was still there. Our town looked exactly like that upside down from Stranger Things. This was the memory that Stranger Things brought for me. Mabel and Violet's parents were very grateful, and I did not leave as they arrived at around 8 in the morning. The UFO was a government spacecraft mission that failed and crashed at an abandoned site not far from our town. I shortly moved to New York that next summer. Moving forward to 10 years, I was 26 and out on a date. My date came in and introduced herself. We lived in a small town. It was Violet. She was 20 and was studying at NYU. We started dating, and the first thing we discussed was the night that it all happened. We have been married for 4 years now, and it all came back to us when we binge-watched the Stranger Things, almost as if it had a part of our life somewhere in it. The place where I come from is quite famous. Well, a version of it. I'm from Hawkins, Texas. It is a great town, and you must have heard of it on the famous Netflix series called Stranger Things. Hawkins is a great town. We are a small town in Texas, but we have everything we need in a tightly knitted community. And unlike Stranger Things, there's nothing weird in this town. Well, at least we thought there wasn't. It was the summer of 2019. Stranger Things had already become this big thing on Netflix, and people were coming all over from the country to take a look at the town. It did give us an economic boost, but it was all over by the end of summer. Me and my girlfriend Demi were a pretty big fan of the show, and we even did the whole tour of all the places that were shown in the infamous forest. It was a very normal run for us, and we did a tour of a bus of nerds that were visiting the town. After rounding up the tours of all the locations, we decided to spend some alone time by the lake, and we dozed off for about an hour. Somewhere in between, Demi woke me up because she heard something. The voice was coming from the other side of the river. We were not scared, but this was the most late we had ever been in that forest, and the lighting outside was dimming as the night was starting to crack. We got up and decided to leave, and took the other way this time, rather than our usual river route. As we're passing by, we saw the abandoned shed warehouse, but the lights were on. It was too late to even dare to investigate, so we let it go. The next week we came back, and this time, I didn't bring Demi with me, to keep her out of any possible dangerous situation. I came out on my own, and decided to look into that shed-like warehouse to understand who was operating it in the middle of nowhere. And as I sneaked to take a look through window, I could see it looked like a lab setup. And before I could get more information by observing, I heard a growling sound. At first, I thought it might have been a dog, but it wasn't. There in the shed stood a 4-foot dog-like creature, more human than hound, but definitely not a dog. And it looked around as if it could smell some foreign musk. I ducked and waited for the right time to storm off. I peeked to look at one more time, and there it was, the old man with the hound, instructing it, whispering something in the ear. I stormed off, and I could feel as if the hound was chasing me. I made sure to do that as silently as possible, because even if the hound was chasing me, there was no chance that I would outrun it, so I tread silently. As soon as I got back, I straight away went to my girlfriend and told her everything that I saw, and like me, she was more excited than scared, because for us, it meant that Stranger Things was closer to reality, and that we would be able to live part of the fantasy that our town famously portrayed in the show. We were pretty excited. We went the next day in broad daylight to sneak and wait until the old man was gone as we spied from afar. As soon as he was gone, we went into the shed, not realizing that the hound could be in there and could be very dangerous as we entered the shed. We saw that it was a fully working lab, and it was just out of Stranger Things. We carefully inspected the place, and it all seemed so real. As we were busy raving about, It all we found, and we forgot about the time. It was evening. We saw the man heading back, and we could listen to the hound. We hid in the tiny compartment, hoping to not get found, until we did. And as the man approached, we just begged for mercy, thinking that we will be found face down in a river somewhere. And as the man brought it out, there it was, the hound. The creature looks alien, and its mouth wide open. And as we got out and saw the creature, we prayed in our hearts for mercy. Moments later, the creature just stood there. It did nothing. It was then the suspicious man told us to not worry, as it was not a real creature, but the prop he made. The whole shed was a studio. He told us that he was inspired by the whole Stranger Things phenomenon, that he decided to make his film about creatures. He called it In the Night They Crawl. It was all so surreal, and we were in complete shock. The man apologized to us, and we apologized to him for breaking. He was a cool old man, didn't complain or anything. But yes, we did ended up helping him, and along with him, we geeked out making the movie with him, and getting in on Stranger Things action. Back in '89, our town was going through some big changes, and a new nuclear plant was being moved to that place. So our town became the last stop before the plant, and that brought in people, new people. Smart out-of-town people were moving to our place and making it the ideal place of development and progress. The place where once the most technological thing was the local radio station was now getting things that were blowing people's minds. Ever since the new people moved in as the construction started, we got an arcade, a movie theater, a shopping mall, and all the new city things. At first, the locals were enraged over the idea of strange people coming in and taking business. But soon, everybody was getting employed. The new school started construction and was going to bring in more opportunities for students, and more horizons were opening up for the place. My father, on the other hand, was very skeptical of all of this. He never wanted these people to come in. He always said, "If Oppenheimer was scared of the things that he made, how could we be so sure that these things will work for us?" And there was this one thing that he always said: progress comes at a price. He was a farmer. He was deeply rooted in the land, and everything modern scared him. The people from the government sent him a proposal of buying land and tried their best. At first, my father refused. But then one of the family friends that were working with the government told him that the bank will eventually seize the land, so it's better to get it for the value than just getting it seized. My father had no choice but to accept the offer. The money from the land was put onto investment, and I was sent to New York for further study where I lived with my aunt. My father and mother relocated to another house a bit distant from the plant. I was out in New York going during August, and I was busy with the classes. I came back home and saw my aunt. She was in tears that there was this weird gut feeling that I had. My aunt came in. She held me tightly and told me that our town was gone. I thought at first that maybe it is one of her moods. She always had those. She was a 35-year-old single woman working in theaters. She was doing a Shakespeare play at that time, and all I could think of was that maybe this is one of her melodramatic moments. I just held her. But then she dropped the bomb and said, "It's our town. Devin is gone now, blown into pieces. There was a nuclear accident, something about the leaks. They say that the people are barely alive and they are being quarantined at the moment." It all hit me so quickly. All I wanted to do was go up to the town and look into the matter. But there was nothing in the media. It was being kept a hush. I was worried and sick to my stomach, and there was no way to contact our parents. Then one day out of the blue, a month later, we got the call. It was covered with a feeble voice, and it was my father telling me that they were all right and they were sheltered from the accident. and that the whole town was alright. It was really weird to hear from them about a month later everything, and he told me not to tell this to anyone. It was strange, and there was something very different about his voice. It was too gentle with me. That is not what he usually is when it comes to talking to me. It seems as if the accident just broke him, and then later, I asked him to put the mother on phone. And while he was doing that, I could hear the radio noise at the background, which was very different from the noise we hear on a crooked telephone. It was almost like a chatter that would come from a busy office. I asked him for his location, and at that moment, the phone got disconnected, and I wasn't even able to talk to Mother. My aunt was much more relieved to hear the news about them being alive. And even though I was pretending to be happy, there was something that was worrying me. I had a gut feeling that something else was going on there. I did not tell her about anything, as it was the last thing I wanted her to worry about. And then by saying that I am going off on a camp, I decided to look into the matter on my own. I went to the nearest town, and to my surprise, everything within the 10-mile radius of our town was now basically a government jurisdiction area. I had to sneak around the fences to get the protective gear. I was going into this alone. And to my surprise, there was not a single hit of radiation in that place. It was all a cover-up story. There was no sign of any radioactive accident, and not a single house looked destroyed. Whatever was happening, government sure wanted to keep it top secret, knowing that there's no risk of getting exposed to radiation was a relief, and it helped me right back on track to look for the real thing. I entered my home quietly, and everything was placed right where it was. I did not realize that there were already cameras placed into the system, when suddenly, my phone rang. It was Dad. He asked me what I was doing there when I was warned to stay away. I asked him what happened, and then what he told me was much harder for me to believe than it is for you. He said it was the night, and they were all asleep, and suddenly, everything started shaking. We were all going through the drill that we have been told about. As we got out of bed, we just were broken into these million particles, and we lost our physicality. We woke up, and we saw that the only way to be present is through electricity or source of it. And everyone in the town is alive, but we are all nothing more than living electromagnetic waves. He told me he cannot explain to me how it feels, but then he told me to come closer to the television. And then as I did, without powering it on, I saw my father inside the television. And there he told me that this is the only way that can. And also said that last he saw my mother was when she tried getting into the computer. She has been lost since then. I was confused, and everything was unreal, until a unit invaded my house and took me with them to a lab. All the way, I was begging to not kill me. And then I met Dr. Lautsky, and she told me to not worry. Since I was already a computer science student, she told me that my exposure is risky. It was at that moment that my life took a drastic turn, and I could never escape this place, not without finding a way to get them all out first. After searching for 2 years, I finally cracked the case, or the code, I must say. But in the carelessness, I made myself particleized. But good thing is that I get to understand everything from 0 to 1 now that I am a binary code.
I grew up in the 80s in this little town called Durant, which is about 6 miles east of Brandon, Florida. Until I was 15 years old, my best friends in the world were these 2 little kids, Bobby and Joey. We were basically inseparable. Not only did we go to the same elementary and middle schools, but we spent all of our free time together. Bobby and Joey were like opposites. Like it was weird that we were even friends to begin with. Bobby was more outgoing, while Joey was more reserved. Bobby would eat just about anything, while Joey was easily the fanciest eater I've ever known. It extended to almost everything, including how scary they found horror movies. And boy, do we love horror movies. We tried just about every trick in the book to sneak into the theaters, to watch The Thing or Nightmare on Elm Street. Sometimes we succeeded, sometimes not. But when we did get in, the result was always the same. Joey would be on the verge of a panic attack for the entire show, while Bobby would be complaining about how it all looked fake or how it wasn't scary enough for him. Nothing seemed to be able to freak him out, not even the transformation scene in The American Werewolf in London. He was impressed. Sure, Kanan is the least bit grossed out or whatever. And I suppose that's why we thought the haunted house or the traveling fair wouldn't scare him either. It was late August of 1985 when the traveling fair came to town, and seeing nothing good was showing down at the local movie theater, we figured we'd stop by to see what it was all about. It was all the usual stuff: cotton candy, fairground rides, BB shooting galleries, etc. But the thing that caught our attention was the haunted house. Virginia Beach Traveling Fair looked pretty cool, and was certainly more of an attractive prospect than the carousel. So after finishing a hot dog, we headed over to the ticket booth to ask them how much. I remember the guy in the booth. He had all the skeletal face paint on, and when we asked him for 3 tickets, he put on the spooky voice like, "Are you sure you boys have the constitution for such a terrible trial?" We were just like, "Yeah, dude, just give us the tickets already." We walk up towards the entrance to go inside. So the way this thing was laid out was like a giant box room that had been divided up into corridors. You made your way through the various corridors, some which narrowed so you had to squeeze through them, and ever so often, a mechanical doodad would jump out to scare you, or an actual person would. I'll admit, the actual people, one of which had on a pretty cool Wolfman mask, are pretty creepy, especially the woman who pretended to be a statue right up until we tried to pass her, and she touched my shoulder, and it almost gave me a heart attack in the process. Got to applaud that level of commitment and subtlety, right? Anyway, Joey and I thought it was pretty cool, even though he was so scared he was ready to puke. But Bobby thought the whole thing was done, so much so that he walked right up to the ticket vendor and demanded his money back. Of course, the guy just points to a little sign that says, "No refunds," but he does so in such a dismissive way that Bobby just about explodes. He started ranting about how it is the worst haunted house he'd ever been to, and that no one in their right mind should ever pay for anything so terrible. The guy talks to us for a minute or two, lowers his voice, and says something that seemed to calm Bobby down. Then when he walks back to us, we found out that this is what the guy had to say. "If you want to see something scary in there, come back later at around 10 p.m. If you're still not satisfied, we'll give you your money back." It seemed sketchy to say the least, but Bobby assured us that the guy was serious, and somehow we got into our heads that we were beginning to see the adult in the house. Bearing in mind, we were kids who had trouble getting into our rated movies, so I don't think I could underestimate how excited we were. We heard that traveling carnivals were known to get a little risque after dark, so the prospect of getting to see that sort of thing in action felt like a real adventure. Joey and I had a curfew at 9 p.m., but we got around it by saying we were staying at Bobby's. Only Bobby's mom worked as a night nurse on weekends, so there'd be no one around to disprove that. It was a foolproof plan. At least, it seemed that way for a while. But as a matter of fact, our little visit to the carnival would end our friendship and change our lives forever. The first time that something was wrong was when we showed up and the whole place seemed to be closed down. There were lights on here and there, a few workers wandering around, carrying heavy-looking tools, but other than that, the place was deserted. At first, I figured the guy just played a trick on us, as in, come back later, but I'll be long gone. But Bobby was determined to get his money back, and we followed him through the carnival grounds until we came across the haunted house. True to his word, the ticket teller was sitting on the steel chairs that led up to the entrance. He made some comment about being surprised, which showed us how he figured we were too chicken to come back for the midnight show, as he called it. We just laughed. Midnight show. It wasn't a minute past 10 p.m., and there he was trying to be all spooky again. But then, Bobby asked him what was so scary about the midnight show. and if he'd be given a refund if it didn't frighten him. Again, the guy promises. If it doesn't spook him, he gets his money back. But what he said next really set me on edge and immediately had me thinking twice about my decision to return. He started by saying how the carnival didn't like leaving paying visitors unhappy, and if we wanted to be scared, he could show us something that had to leave us very frightened indeed. He said it was something to keep in reserve for those dissatisfied with the haunted house, something that very few have come to witness without losing their sanity altogether. He said only a small, dedicated crew handles the midnight show because the sheer psychological strain of the performance can be extremely harmful to their mental health. I remember Bobby piping up like, "I'm not dumb, dude. I see what you're doing. He's just gonna beat the snot out of us when we get in here as payback for talking smack." The guy laughed, then swore on his mother's grave that each of us would walk in on our own volition and walk out unharmed. As for our sanity, he couldn't guarantee we'd still be in one piece by the end. Joey was out from the word go. He's like, "Nope, screw this. I'm not going in." Bobby, on the other hand, was typical Bobby. I don't think wild horses could have dragged him away from that carnival. But for me, there was something about the way the ticket vendor was talking. He wasn't trying to sound scary or be scary. He actually sounded kind of scared himself, almost like he didn't want us to go in. And either he was an Oscar-level acting talent, or there was really something to what he was saying. I'll never forget the way Bobby looked at me when I said, "Yeah, I'm good. Actually, I think I'll stay here with Joey." It was like disgust mixed with ridicule. I know for a fact he thought I was being a big baby for having let the carny dude psych me out, but I made up my mind, and I wasn't going to budge. In the end, Bobby went down on his own. Well, Joey and I waited for him outside. I could tell he felt a little nervous walking in, but I was nervous too. I was nervous for him, because as much as we'd been reassured that nothing was going to happen to him, a little piece of me thought Bobby was going to get his bell rang as soon as he walked in. Me and Joker outside for maybe 10 to 15 minutes waiting for Bobby while wondering what could be going on in that haunted house. There wasn't any noise or anything, and our walk through in the daytime had taken like 5 minutes tops. So when 20 to 25 to 30 minutes went by, we started to get pretty freaking worried for Bobby. Only right when we were about to go banging on the door of the haunted house, Bobby reappears with no limps, no swelling, and no bleeding. He looked okay, but he wasn't, and I'm not sure Bobby was ever really okay again. I remember walking back to his mom's place like it was yesterday. The exasperation I felt when we asked Bobby what happened, and all he said was nothing. We were flabbergasted. It certainly didn't seem like nothing had happened, because Bobby was definitely shaken up by something. At first, he was pale, visibly shaken, and he had this kind of vacant expression on his face. It's hard to explain. He seemed mostly shocked by whatever it was he had just seen, but he was definitely disturbed too. We kept begging him to tell us what he'd seen, but he just wouldn't say. All he gave us was nothing. Stop asking about it. We asked him if it was scary, and he said yes, but he denied any kind of violence had occurred. The guy promised he wouldn't be touched, and he'd apparently been true to his word on that, too. But that didn't mean they hadn't done something to Bobby. And despite all his denials, I know that was the case. The last thing he said about it before he threatened to kick us out of his mom's house if we asked again was a couple of hours later, when Joy broke down and asked him, "Dude, I'm begging you, at least give us a clue what happened in there." "Something that doesn't make sense," Bobby replied. He never talked about it again. I know that seems unbelievable, but time moves pretty fast at that age. We were due to start our junior year of high school. I started dating that first semester. Joey broke his arm on Bobby's skateboard that winter, and there was other stuff to think about. I'm not saying we just forgot about it. And it came up in conversation once or twice in the months that followed, but every time we brought it up, Bobby would just give us this look, and the one time we persisted, he just walked back home without a word and didn't return our calls for a week. I'd like to say that dropping the subject for good repaired our friendship, but it didn't. Like I might have said earlier, what happened that night was the beginning of the end of our little friendship triangle, and we slowly began to drift apart. The end of the end, if that makes any sense, was when Bobby and his mom moved out to New Hampshire for her new job. We all promised we'd keep in touch, but we never did. And I think Joy and I just bummed each other out after that, and we were wondering what happened to Bobby, always hoping he'd call someday, but he didn't call. And we didn't even get the number for his new place. I still think about Bobby an awful lot, and I still think about him saying something that didn't make any sense. I've racked my dumb brain for literally decades, but I just can't work out what he meant by that. My wife thinks he was lying, and that those carnival workers really did lay hands on him or something. Just because he didn't have any cuts or bruises doesn't mean they didn't slap him around or threaten him a little. And besides, you can do a lot worse things to someone without leaving a black eye or a bruised lip. I sometimes wonder if that really is true. What would happen to him that was so traumatic that he just couldn't deal with it? Bobby was a brave man. I think he was the bravest and most defiant person I've ever known. If the tough thing needed doing, Bobby did it. And I think that if that thing just so happened to be opening up about being hurt or something, Bobby would have done it maybe later than rather sooner. But he would have, and I think I'll just end it there. Whenever I talk about Bobby, every third word out of my mouth is maybe. I'm so sick of maybes I can barely even describe it. I just hope his story isn't over yet. But he's out there somewhere, living a happy, fruitful life. I tried to look for him on Facebook ever so often, just to see if he made an account or something. But I've had no luck as of yet. But maybe next week, or maybe next year, I'll finally find out what happened to Bobby and get to say hello to an old friend in the process. Maybe, just maybe.